on this episode of Scripps News Reports.
I'm not concerned about chasing the pack, honestly.
Earning your trust, building better news.
The reason people don't trust the news is because we're not there for them.
One-on-one with our CEO, the top executive of a leading American news company, and
footage and photos out of context, making false claims, manipulating images.
Trust, transparency, accountability. Our annual National News Literacy Week now underway. It's 2024, an election year, and that makes what we're about to talk about over the next half hour even more important. Can you trust what you read or see? Increasingly, we know the answer for many of you is no. In 2016, 8 in 10 of you said you trusted your local news. It was almost the same for national news. But by last year, that had dropped to just 7 in 10 for local news and 6 in 10 for national news. Ahead, we explore what it will take to reverse that trend, and we'll reveal how artificial intelligence is set to make major changes to the way news is reported and consumed. But first, during this National News Literacy Week, a question about how you get your news in the first place. We asked Amber Strong to explore that generational divide.
Seemingly born with a cell phone in hand, a new generation is increasingly turning online for news. That includes aggregators like Apple and Google News and social media. Margot Suska, journalism professor and author of the new book Hedged, says social media offers something traditional news doesn't.
It's an opportunity to engage. It's an opportunity to comment. It's an opportunity to share. Right away they can say, I saw something, I have a feeling about it, and right away I can have a reaction to it.
While the oldest Americans still tend to get their news from television networks, one thing both sides have in common is a distrust of the media. As X-owner Elon Musk stated, he gets all his news from X, calling it much more immediate and less propaganda. That lack of trust is a problem, says Demario Phipps-Smith with the News Literacy Project.
When we think about the information landscape we're in right now, how expansive it is, how almost instantaneous it is now, and then when you think about the misinformation crisis and how important having good, accurate, credible information is to civic discourse.
The popularity of video-based sites like TikTok is causing mainstream news outlets to adapt with short, digestible content. According to Pew Research, nearly 9 in 10 major news sources have a presence on TikTok. Still, experts say there's a risk to only getting your news from quick online videos, even if the source is legitimate.
You're not really exposing yourself to multiple points of view, multiple perspectives, historical context. And I think there is a danger in only exposing yourself to that kind of content.
While TikTok is a booming source of news for younger people, they also concede news on the site is among the least trustworthy, according to a 2023 poll from YouGov. Experts say skepticism is a good thing across all platforms, especially in the age of misinformation.
Is the site that you're using, does it have a byline? Does it have a corrections policy? Does it give information about how it's used, its sources?
I think it behooves young people to really think about what standards are important to them, what ethics are important to them when it comes to news coverage, and then go and find sources that align with that.
Amber Strong, Scripps News, Washington.
We know that earning your trust and keeping it is vital. If you can't trust information from your news media, it becomes virtually impossible in our democracy to make informed decisions. Our parent company, the E.W. Scripps Company, operates media properties across the country, nationally, and locally in more than 40 markets. Many of those local newscasts are moving away from the traditional model you've seen for decades. James Packard asked our CEO why and why National News Literacy Week is so important to him.
This year, news literacy is focusing on responsible sharing, something that's become so important given how much Americans rely on social media for their news and information. So we really want to focus on arming people with the tools that they need in order to think before they share, in order to research before they start spreading.
And that's something that is getting more challenging because we've seen even like AI-generated news anchors presenting information to audiences that, for now, there may be some degree of distinguishing between that and a real human. Maybe there's an extra finger or their face twitches in a weird way, but someday it's going to be really hard to distinguish. So how can we prepare people now to have that skill set to say, oh, this doesn't seem like a real person?
Yeah, the first thing we need to do is to remind audiences, consumers, that they should approach content with a healthy dose of skepticism and be willing to take just an extra step to verify that it's authentic, that it's real, that it comes from a legitimate source. AI will present a significant challenge as it gets better and better. I've already seen examples that are remarkable that I would never assume were deep fakes. And so it's going to be a challenge for brands like Scripps's in order to make sure we protect our brands. We protect the perception of our brands. But likewise, we're going to need partnership from the people on the other side of the screen, the consumers, to ensure that they approach all content, even our content, with some skepticism and ensure that it's legitimate, it's real.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about some of the difficult decisions you've had to make in terms of the makeup of Scripps broadly and how we cover our local communities. I know in some of our local markets, some of the live broadcasts have gone away. Is that something that you feel is the future of news? Do you understand the concerns from people who feel that that may actually take resources away from being able to respond to local news, especially in the evenings?
Well, the move we've made in order to prioritize news gathering, reporting over what I would sort of characterize as the performative aspects of our business is actually, completely in line with our dedication to ensure that we're covering our communities better. In reality, the news business is a tough business. We're under revenue pressure, and there's so much fragmentation. People have so many options. But when it comes to local news, local television news continues to be the most used and reliable source of news and information. We want to make sure that we're perpetuating our responsibility in each one of those markets. And so deprioritizing the performative aspects of our business, in other words, the live technology, the use of presenters and anchors, and instead reallocating resources so that we make sure that we're properly covering the geographic and demographic communities in which we operate is very, very consistent with the mission. I think that our business has for far too long relied on what was a perceived technological advantage relative to live. There's nothing to say that watching a news broadcast that is live is actually presenting to you information more relevant to your life than a more well-produced, well-reported telecast that is focused on covering the communities better. We've overdone breaking news. So instead of thinking about breaking news as a noun, what we want to do at Scripps is bring breaking news back to being a verb. Breaking news initially was the idea that a reporter would develop a story, a scoop that nobody else had. And with all of the demands of live television, we have not given our journalists the time to actually do that. And so by eliminating some of those demands and by reprioritizing and restaffing for more field reporting, more news gathering, more journalism, we expect to be in the breaking news business, but we expect to be in the breaking news business for the verb. Reporters actually telling stories in communities that otherwise wouldn't be told.
Is the outlook, does it have the potential to change if you discover that audiences are responding more to a late breaking story on another channel that draws them away from the Scripps coverage?
I'm not concerned about chasing the pack. If a breaking news story about a garbage can fire being covered by a helicopter draws people's attention away temporarily, and we're not in a position to cover that kind of story, I'm going to be okay with that. As long as on balance, the telecast that we produce does a better job of informing and engaging consumers in the markets where we have a responsibility to serve. We still have the ability to be live and cover breaking news if we need to. We expect to always be there for the breaking news stories, the severe weather, the things that people rely on us for. But we want to prioritize storytelling. We want to prioritize making sure we have enough resources to cover the entire geography of a market. The reason people don't trust the news is because we're not there for them. We haven't done a good job of being there for them. They'll tell us, hey, you came to town when there was a quadruple homicide, but you pulled out and you were never here when we were just living our lives and there were other things going on. And so reallocating resources into our markets so that we have more news gatherers, more journalists in the field covering those communities all the time, not just when there's a sort of a disaster, but all the time, we think will benefit us in the long run.
There's a lot of reasons to be skeptical about people's consumption of the news. What gives you hope that our news literacy as consumers will, the royal hour sort of, that news literacy will improve?
I think Americans want a healthy democracy. I have a lot of faith in the American people. I have a lot of faith in our system of government. And though we live in this incredibly polarized world, I expect us to rise above it eventually and ensure that this democracy lives on and that we do so in a way that, that citizens remain engaged in the decision-making process.
Adam Symson sitting down with our James Packard. Right now, a quick break, then an FYI about AI guarding against fake information created by computers. A couple of weeks ago, every newsroom here in our company across the country got an email about an emerging threat to how we do our jobs. Artificial intelligence, computer-based learning, now able to write news stories, generate headlines, and more. What AI means for the future of how we report the news is still being defined. A grand experiment is underway. Here, we've decided a human will always be accountable for the information we publish, and the use of AI in our news gathering is going to be strictly regulated. Dan Grossman peels back the curtain on the discussions underway in newsrooms large and small.
I'll be honest, I wasn't even alive for these days.
This is all handset type, and this is the way it was done.
The days where people like Dean Coombs would individually ink letters into a linotype machine and press them onto paper to form sentences that would then form stories for people to digest.
They're mechanical. They're 100 years old mechanical, and it's 28,000 parts.
But mechanics are past. Digital is present, and this is the future.
It's lightning speed, the way journalism has changed over the past 3 decades.
Mike Humphrey is an assistant professor of journalism at Colorado State University, and he's been teaching about the consequences of AI in his classroom for the better part of the last 8 years, even before the advent of things like ChatGPT.
I started asking the question, 10 years from now, when I own a media company, why should I hire you instead of some kind of artificial intelligence? You know, you're not going to be as efficient. You're going to be sick at times. You're going to not want to work 24 hours a day. And why should I hire you?
The question can be seen in several news organizations around the country. In 2014, the Associated Press was the first news organization to implement AI when it automated stories about corporate earnings. The Washington Post then used bots to take election data in real time and publish articles. This past December, the New York Times announced it hired its first ever editorial director of artificial intelligence initiatives. And a recent survey from the London School of Economics and Political Science found of 120 editors and journalists surveyed from 105 newsrooms worldwide, 75% had used AI somewhere in the chain of news gathering, production, and distribution.
There's an ethical question for sure, like just basic ethics, what's the right and wrong thing to do? But journalism already has a lot of trust issues. And if we want to exacerbate that problem as quickly as possible, we will be very unclear about the way we are using AI. So, you know, to really build a confidence with an audience, we need to be very, very transparent.
It's a far cry from Dean and his salt-of-the-earth tactics, as his machine is the last known operating linotype machine in the U.S. But it's a machine, much like the machine of AI, nonetheless. Dan Grossman, Scripps News, Denver.
Let's stay on this theme and bring in our next guest. Alexa Volland has expertise in covering misinformation and disinformation. She helps lead a team with our partner, the News Literacy Project, teaching educators about news literacy. Alexa, thanks for joining us. First question, how likely is it that we will see a future where AI is both used and trusted in newsrooms?
Interesting question. And I think It is unfolding in real time. There are already newsrooms that have been utilizing AI, and they've been utilizing AI for several years, like the Associated Press. There are instances where newsrooms have slowly rolled out AI to help with the creation of content, but haven't been very transparent about that. And then we discover that there's inaccuracies in the content itself, or there's not a lot of transparency around who is creating that content. That said, there are a lot of opportunities that journalists might want to use AI for in the future, possibly helping generate interview questions or having it fact check content down the road, maybe flag potential bias. So it's very much an constantly evolving piece of technology, but how newsrooms decide to use it really comes down to also how transparent with their audience are going to be when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence.
And in the middle of last year, news executives were asked about their concerns using AI tools in their newsrooms. The top two issues here, 85% said they're concerned about inaccurate information. 67% were concerned about plagiarism and copyright infringement. What do these numbers tell you?
That there's a lot of room for improvement and that people should be extremely cautious when they're kind of consuming text generated by these AI chatbots, or just AI generated text in particular. These AI chatbots, as they're constantly predicting the next word and the next word, they will sometimes what we call hallucinate, where they actually just start making up pieces of information, and they do so with a lot of confidence, and it's very difficult for just regular people to decipher what is true and what is false. And because it's delivered in a way that's very authoritative sounding, it's very alluring to assume that these AI chatbots do have all of the information, which we know is not true.
Because we have a variety of people watching our conversation right now. I think of teenagers, parents, grandparents, different incomes, blue collar, white collar workers, retirees. What's the number one piece of advice that you wish everyone would think about when it comes to being a more responsible news consumer?
One thing I wish everyone could kind of keep in mind is that the quality of our information directly impacts the quality of our decisions. So it's really important that whenever we're presented with information that does make us have a really strong emotional response or does kind of make those spidey senses tingle, that we do that additional step of trying to verify or contextualize that information. Because decisions that are made at the ballot, that are based on falsehoods, will drastically impact the world that we all live in for generations.
Yeah, it is such an important conversation. Alexa Volland with our partner at the News Literacy Project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
A quick break, then we're back to try and clear the fog of war from Ukraine to Gaza. One of the most difficult stories to cover is war. Beyond the heartbreak and horror of it all, there is the very real fog of misinformation or disinformation. Can you trust either side in a conflict to tell the full, unvarnished truth of what's happening? The answer is virtually always no. Amber Strong is back now with what you might call a war on misinformation.
The troops advance, with the river and smoke screen behind them.
Updates from war zones look a lot different these days. During modern warfare, there are two battles, the bout from the front lines and the fight over misinformation online.
It used to be that you needed to have a camera crew and you needed to have a professional reporter. Now, people are reporting with their cell phones.
Experts say sometimes that's a good thing.
With the Arab Spring in 2011, 2012, we saw Twitter being used by just regular citizens to show what was going on in the Arab world at that time. And it was very organic, and a lot of the information that was going around was true.
There are also a lot of people on social media that are peddling footage and photos out of context, making false claims, manipulating images, fabricating images now with AI.
The speed of social media lends itself to misinformation and disinformation over where exactly the news is coming from and who is posting it. Like confusion over who bombed a Gaza hospital in October, some pointing to Israel, others to militant groups. or videos claiming to be evidence of recent attacks that were actually from past incidents. A recent report from Bellingcat found images all over social media from completely different wars wrongly attributed to the Gaza conflict. Misinformation is often spread by everyday people hoping to shed some sort of insider knowledge of an event or to push their own beliefs. Disinformation is purposely spreading lies, sometimes through state-sponsored media.
Atrocities in certain Ukrainian cities, for example, high civilian casualties. The Russian, propagandists and state-sponsored media tried to sort of draw that into doubt, pushing conspiratorial claims about actors, about Ukrainians faking deaths.
Competing with the speed of social media or state-sponsored outlets, it's tough for many traditional newsrooms who may have standards for what's published and what isn't. But experts say transparency and taking extra steps are necessary.
These organizations, the professional news organizations, they're going to do more damage by spreading misinformation and having to walk it back than they would if they had waited and verified later.
Everyday people have a role too, like considering the source before sharing.
Have a look to see who the original poster is, see what their political leanings might be. Do they have any kind of reason to spread information that might be false?
Becoming one more fighter in the war on misinformation. Amber Strong, Scripps News, Washington.
That's the time we have together for this half hour, but know this, our commitment to building better news is not about us, it's about you. What we do is try to give you the information you need to make informed decisions about the world around you. It's the most important part of our jobs, and it's one that we recommit to doing as well as we can on this National News Literacy Week and every week of the year. For now, I'm Chris Stewart for Scripps News Reports.